What if the most dangerous crime isn't an act, but a thought? One sentence halts a city, trains freeze, hospitals falter, workers put down their tools. There's no suspect, no law to charge, just an idea.
Prologue. The first symptom. The morning the city learned it could be stopped by a sentence, the trains did not crash. They simply, without announcement, without violence, ceased to move. On the central operations wall, the rail lines were thin colored veins, pulsing with the usual obedient dots. Then a dot reached a junction, paused and did not decide. Another arrived and paused behind it. Within minutes, the pulsing became a clot. There were no alarms at first, only the soft wrongness of a system waiting for a decision that would not come. By the time Lena Sato was waved through the glass gates and into the control room, every supervisor was standing. It wasn't panic. The room was too trained for panic. It was something more unnerving, a silence that implied nobody knew which category of emergency this belonged to, so no one could begin the right ritual. A young operator pointed. "It's not mechanical, it's not power, it's..." He swallowed, glancing at his colleagues as if asking permission to say it. "It's the controller." The controller was a person, not the algorithm. The city's transit had a human kept in the loop for liability and comfort, a relic of older fears. The human did not steer individual trains, no one could at that scale, but he had authority to approve and override. A signature, an assent, a thumbprint on the final prompt, "Proceed." In the secure booth overlooking the room, the controller sat with his hands in his lap. He wasn't slumped. He wasn't ill. He was upright, calm, as if waiting for a kettle to boil. On the inside of the booth's glass, written in thick black marker, were 5 words, each letter pressed hard enough to squeak. No signature without sight. Lena had spent 12 years in the civic harm unit, and she knew what made certain cases dangerous wasn't blood or guns. It was the feeling that the crime scene was the mind. Her badge didn't read detective, it read field analyst. In practice, she did what detectives used to do: pattern, motive, chain of cause. But her evidence rarely fit in bags. Her supervisor, Arden Klein, was waiting beside the booth door. Klein's hair had gone prematurely white from a life of absorbing other people's unclassifiable problems. "Controller's name is Devlin Ma," Klein said quietly. 10 years clean record, passed his psych reviews. Came in at 6:41. At 7:12, he halted approvals. At 7:14, he wrote that. When we called, he asked for a witness. A witness to what? Klein's mouth tightened. He said, "Witness me refusing." Lena watched Devlin through the glass. His face held no strain. It looked almost relieved, like someone who had been holding a breath for a long time and finally allowed himself to exhale. "You've seen this phrase before," Klein said. It wasn't a question. Lena felt the old, careful part of her, the part trained to keep distance from contagious ideas, reach for gloves that didn't exist. "I've seen variants," she admitted. "On incident reports, school counselors, HR disputes, the refusal cases." Klein nodded. "We've got 43 in the last month. Same structure, different objects, people refusing to participate in systems they can't fully understand. They quit their jobs mid-shift. They stop signing forms. They won't click agree to anything. They call it ethics." Lena leaned closer to the glass. Devlin's hands were visible, fingers relaxed. No tremor, no agitation. Not manic, not dissociated. Just certain. "Why call us?" Lena asked. "Because it's spreading," Klein said. "And because nobody can arrest a thought." Lena did not answer. In the booth, Devlin lifted his eyes, and for a moment she had the uneasy sensation he could see her not as an agent of the city, but as another person trapped in a web of permissions she hadn't read. Devlin raised his hand, palm open, and pressed it to the glass, an old gesture of showing you had nothing concealed. Then slowly he lowered it to his lap, as if to demonstrate he could choose not to use it. Lena realized what chilled her about the message on the glass. It wasn't the refusal. It was the implication that she and everyone else had been signing blind. The city could survive a strike. It could survive sabotage. It could even survive fanaticism, because fanaticism had faces. But a refusal that felt like righteousness, an idea that offered people clean hands, could travel without leaders, without headquarters, without anything you could storm. Klein handed her a tablet. "Your case file. We're calling it blind contract, like an outbreak." Lena took it. The title on the first page was plain: Incident Cluster, Voluntary Noncompliance, Moral Refusal. Under that, a line that did not belong in any police report. Primary vector, an idea. 1. Contact tracing. Lena approached the case the way the unit trained its analysts to approach anything intangible, as if it were a disease with a narrative. Not metaphorically, literally. The city had learned, after enough panics and panaceas, that information could behave like biology. It had incubation periods. It had superspreaders. It had immunity and reinfection. It had mutations that made it harder to recognize and easier to transmit. The unit's office did not have interrogation rooms. It had whiteboards, network maps, and a small library no one advertised. The only cells were for evidence. Lena sat at her desk and opened the incident list. 43 in 1 month. That number alone could be explained by a new policy or a seasonal stressor. But the descriptions didn't align with any policy. They aligned with each other. A nurse in Ward 8 refused to administer medication because the supply chain algorithm that priced and rationed it was proprietary. She stood beside the locked cabinet and said she would not be the last link in a chain she could not audit. A teacher stopped grading because the district's evaluation model used learning analytics she was not allowed to see. She wrote parents' letters describing grading as a blind contract with a machine's appetite. A sanitation dispatcher walked away from the routing screen and left trucks unassigned because he could not know whether the optimization model favored wealthy neighborhoods. A young man at a food cooperative refused to scan membership cards, insisting that the database was a mouth that never closes. None of these were crimes. Most were framed by the refusers themselves as acts of conscience. The damage was in the wake: missed shifts, stalled services, families frightened by sudden moral conversions. The phrase on the train controller's glass appeared verbatim in 7 of the statements. In others, it had shifted. No consent without comprehension, no agreement with invisible hands. If you can't read the rules, you can't be ruled. Lena pulled up the videos from the earliest case. The nurse, Amaya Finch, stood in a hospital corridor wearing gloves she had taped tightly at the wrists. The camera caught her explaining, voice steady, that she could not, ethically, be a handoff for a system built on hidden assumptions. There was no anger in her. There was a kind of serenity that made the security guard's pleading look frantic. Lena paused the video and watched Amaya's eyes. Not wide, not feverish, not scared, certain. She opened the next file. The teacher, Mina Bhatia, had left her classroom with the children still at their desks. The statement she wrote later was longer, almost essay-like. In the margin of the scanned page, someone had drawn a small symbol, a square with one corner missing, like a piece of paper torn away. The same symbol appeared in a sanitation dispatcher's resignation letter. And on a flyer recovered from a subway wall, a torn corner square printed in grey, beneath it the words, "Read what you sign." If you can't read it, don't sign. Lena copied the symbol into her notebook. Then she began tracing contacts, not human contacts, but intellectual ones. The unit kept a tool called a semantic sequencer. It wasn't magic. It was simply software trained to look for recurring phrases, metaphors, rhythms. The fingerprints' ideas sometimes left when they wore language like gloves. Lena fed it the 43 statements, the flyers, the social posts pulled from public sources. The sequencer returned a tree, at the trunk, the phrase on the glass, then branches. Comprehension, audit, invisible hands, clean complicity. Leaves, individual variants, each shaped to the speaker's life. The nurse's version was about bodies and consent. The dispatcher's was about neighborhoods and fairness. The teacher's was about children and measurement. The sequencer marked probable ancestry. A phrase in Mina Bhatia's letter, the handless system, appeared in 12 other texts. A sentence that sounded like a slogan, purity is refusal, appeared in 8. And, tucked like a seed beneath the rest, was a line that did not sound like a slogan at all. We are asked to sign in the dark. It was older in tone, less polished, more like a fragment from a book. Lena clicked for the earliest occurrence. The tool highlighted a post on an obscure forum dated 14 months earlier. The username was something like palimpsest_owl. The post was short, almost offhand. We are asked to sign in the dark. That's the whole trick. They call it consent, but it's just obedience with better lighting. No mention of trains or hospitals, no symbol, no manifesto tone, just a sentence tossed like a pebble into water. Lena leaned back and felt the familiar frustration. Ideas were not like viruses in one crucial way. Viruses had genomes. If you sequenced them far enough, you could find the first case. A bat, a lab, a market. Ideas had origins too, but they were often braided, a quote misremembered, a metaphor sharpened, a grievance given poetry. They didn't need a single patient zero. They could emerge from a crowd. Still, the sentence we are asked to sign in the dark was a clue. It had the taste of a source text. Lena ran a search across the city's licensed ebook database. Nothing. She ran it across university archives. A hit, a scanned journal article, linguistics adjacent, published 21 years ago in a now-defunct review. The title was strange enough to make her sit forward. The Ethics of Unread Agreements, Consent as Theatre in Complex Systems. Lena opened the PDF. On page 7, in a footnote, was the sentence. We are asked to sign in the dark. The footnote credited an unpublished manuscript. E. Miro, The Blind Contract, 2003. Lena stared at the name. Elias Miro. Not a public figure, not a household philosopher. The kind of person whose ideas lived in margins until someone dragged them into daylight. She printed the page because paper felt safer in her hands than a glowing screen. At the bottom of the printout, she wrote, "Find the manuscript." Then, in smaller letters beneath, because she knew the real work would not be locating paper, but understanding contagion, find what it became. 2. The crime scene is a life. The unit's protocols insisted, do not treat victims of an idea as idiots or villains. An idea did harm precisely because it met something real in the person it infected. Fear, shame, longing, a need for coherence. If you dismissed that, you lost the trail. So Lena went to the hospital first, not to argue with Amaya Finch, but to see what the idea had attached itself to. Ward 8 smelled like sanitizer and warm plastic. The corridors were lined with posters about compliance. Wash hands, mask up, report symptoms. In an alcove, a monitor looped a video about patient rights, each line of text softened by friendly icons. Lena met Amaya in a staff lounge that had been temporarily turned into a meeting room. Amaya wore the same taped gloves as in the video. Not latex, thin fabric like the kind you'd wear to protect paper from oils. Amaya sat with her hands folded. She didn't look ashamed. She looked like someone prepared to be misunderstood. Lena kept her voice even. "I'm not here to discipline you," she said. "I'm here to understand what happened." Amaya's gaze flickered to Lena's badge and back. "Understanding is the problem," she said. Lena let that hang. Too much dialogue would turn this into debate, and debate was how ideas spread. Instead, she asked questions the way an epidemiologist asked about symptoms. "When did you first encounter the phrase you used in your statement?" Lena asked. Amaya hesitated, then answered as if reciting a timeline. 3 weeks ago, a colleague sent me an essay, a scan. It had this symbol." She tapped the table with her gloved finger, tracing a square with a missing corner. "What essay?" Amaya's mouth tightened. "It didn't have a title. It had an excerpt. It said consent is only real when the consenter can name what they're consenting to. It said medicine has become a kind of sacrament, and the priesthood is proprietary code." Lena wrote the phrases down. "Who sent it?" "I won't name her," Amaya said quickly, then softer, "because it shouldn't be a crime to read." Lena did not correct her. She wasn't sure. Instead, she asked, "What changed after you read it?" Amaya's eyes shifted, as if tracking something moving behind Lena. "I started noticing all the times we ask people to agree without explanation. It's constant. The consent forms, the discharge forms, the data sharing. They put it in front of sick people and call it choice." Her voice remained calm, but there was a tightness under it, a pressure like a held breath. "I thought I was helping, and then I realized I was helping the hospital more than the patient. I was making the machine look humane." "Did anyone encourage you to refuse?" Lena asked. Amaya shook her head. "No one had to. The idea did." Lena left the hospital with two things: a photocopy of the excerpt Amaya had read, and the sensation that the idea had not created Amaya's anger. It had given it a clean shape. The excerpt was printed on cheap paper. At the top was the torn corner square. Below it, a paragraph in dense text. "Consent is not a button, it is a map. When we are asked to choose without the map, we are not choosing, we are being chosen. The signature becomes a ritual that launders ignorance into legitimacy. We are asked to sign in the dark." At the bottom, a line from The Blind Contract, E. Miro. No date, no publisher, no context, just the paragraph, sharp as a blade. Lena drove across the city to Mina Bhatia's apartment next. Mina had been placed on administrative leave. She refused to meet with school officials, but she had agreed, through a brief email, to speak with a harm analyst, because the term sounded less like law enforcement. Mina's apartment was small and meticulous. Books were stacked in stable towers. There was a child's drawing on the refrigerator, a rectangle with a corner missing like the symbol drawn in crayon. Mina offered tea. Lena accepted, mostly for the ritual of hands doing something ordinary. Mina's voice, when she spoke, was the voice of someone used to explaining concepts to people who hadn't asked for them. "They call it personalization," Mina said, "but it's surveillance with a friendly font. The kids get scored constantly. Behavior, attention, engagement. And the model is hidden. So when a child asks why they're failing, I can't tell them. I can only say the machine says so." Lena asked, "Where did you encounter the phrase blind contract?" Mina smiled without humor. "At first I thought it was a metaphor, then it became literal." She reached into a drawer and pulled out a printout, another excerpt with the symbol. "A friend in a reading group sent it." "Reading group," Lena repeated. "Name?" Mina hesitated. "Palimpsest. The same word as the forum username, palimpsest_owl. Lena's pen paused. "Where do you meet?" Mina's eyes narrowed, not in suspicion of Lena personally, but in defense of something fragile. "Why?" "Because I'm trying to find where this started," Lena said. "Not to punish people for reading, but to understand why it's spreading like it is." Mina's fingers brushed the corner of the printout, as if checking it was still there. "It started because people are tired," she said. "Tired of being told their consent is meaningless. Tired of being the human face of systems that don't explain themselves." She looked up. "If you try to stop it by calling it criminal, you'll only prove it right." Lena felt the truth in that, and it irritated her because it complicated her job. "Palimpsest," Lena repeated. "How do I contact them?" Mina did not give her names. She gave her a location, an old municipal library branch scheduled for renovation, used after hours by community groups that liked quiet. As Lena left, Mina said one more thing, almost as an afterthought. "Be careful. The idea is persuasive because it's not entirely wrong." Lena drove back toward the unit with the excerpts on her passenger seat like contraband. She thought of Devlin Marr sitting behind glass, hands in his lap, stopping the trains with a sentence. She thought of Amaya's taped gloves and Mina's child's drawing. No one had been harmed by force. They had been harmed by clarity, and the city's usual tools, punishment, deterrence, were built for people who feared consequences. This idea seemed to offer its believers something stronger than fear, a way to feel clean. Third genome of a sentence. In the unit's lab, Lena pinned the excerpts to a board and began treating them like biological samples. The first step was sequencing, identifying the core structure that remained stable across variants. She extracted phrases: sign in the dark, consent is theater, signature launders ignorance, no signature without sight, invisible hands, clean complicity, purity is refusal. Then she looked for what changed, mutations that made the idea more transmissible. Early versions like the forum post were observational. They call it consent, but it's obedience. They invited thought. Later versions were imperative. Don't sign. They invited action. Some versions added moral absolutes. If you participate, you are complicit. That was a mutation with high virulence. It turned everyday life into a test. Others added imagery. Hands, darkness, laundering. That made the idea memorable. It lodged in the body. Lena ran the sequencer on a larger data set pulled from public posts that used the symbol. The tool returned a map, a network of accounts, groups, shares. At the center were not famous influencers but small nodes with intense connections, reading circles, professional forums, encrypted chat groups. The idea moved through trust, not broadcast. Still, there were spikes, moments where the idea leapt into the wider city. One spike coincided with a popular podcast episode titled "Consent is a Lie." Another spike followed a viral video of a young woman tearing up a stack of forms and saying quietly, "I won't sign my ignorance anymore." Lena watched the video. The woman didn't shout. She didn't call for revolution. She spoke with the careful cadence of someone confessing something shameful and then refusing to be ashamed. That was the danger. It didn't look like radicalization. It looked like waking up. Lena clicked through the podcast transcript. The host mentioned Miro casually, like a name everyone should know. He quoted a line Lena hadn't seen yet. "If you cannot name the terms, you cannot be said to agree." She searched for the quote. It appeared in dozens of posts, sometimes credited to Miro, sometimes to the blind contract, as if it were a scripture, sometimes not credited at all, absorbed into people's own language. Lena pulled up the old journal article she'd found, The Ethics of Unread Agreements. She read it slowly, like a detective reading a ransom note for handwriting. The author, a linguist named Dr. Mina Serrano, had analyzed how consent language functioned as performance. She argued that agreement in complex systems was often a ritual that legitimized power. In a footnote, she cited Elias Miro's unpublished manuscript. She described it as an ethically rigorous, if somewhat austere, critique. Lena searched for Serrano. The database showed she was now retired, living in a coastal town 2 hours away, still occasionally publishing short essays on language and law. Lena stared at the footnote again. The manuscript was unpublished. Yet excerpts were everywhere now, stripped of context, weaponized into refusal. How had an unpublished manuscript become a citywide moral epidemic? There were only a few ways someone had found the manuscript and released it. Serrano had shared it privately and it leaked. The manuscript was a myth, an authority invented to give the idea weight. The text circulating wasn't Miro's at all, but something written later under his name. Lena didn't know which was worse. If it was a myth, then the idea had created its own author, the way religions created saints. If it was real, then somewhere there was a full text, one that might contain not only the infection, but the antidote. She requested a travel authorization to interview Serrano. Klein approved it without comment, but his eyes held a question. "Are you sure you want to get close to this?" The unit trained its analysts in cognitive hygiene. Don't read extremist propaganda unmediated. Don't immerse yourself in seductive narratives without breaks. Don't let the shape of a worldview replace the messy discomfort of reality. But this case wasn't a fringe cult. It was a moral argument. Lena packed a paper notebook because she didn't want her notes tagged by the same systems under scrutiny. Before she left, she went to see Devlin Marr. He was still in the booth. The transit system had been rerouted through emergency protocols. The city was limping, not dead. Devlin looked up as she approached. His face was pale from fluorescent light, but his eyes were clear. Lena spoke through the intercom. "Devlin, why did you stop approving trains?" He answered without drama. "Because I couldn't read what I was approving." "The routing algorithm?" Lena asked. Devlin nodded. "They told me it was safe. They told me it was fair. They told me my job was to press yes." His voice remained level. "My job was to be the hand that makes their decisions legal." Lena asked, "Where did you get that phrase?" Devlin's gaze flicked to the words on the glass. "From a pamphlet," he said. "From a friend. From a thought I couldn't unthink." Lena leaned closer. What was the thought? Devlin's mouth twitched, almost a smile. That my signature was a kind of violence, not dramatic violence, quiet violence, the kind that happens when you make someone else's blindness official. Lena felt something tighten in her chest. She could almost see how the idea had wrapped itself around Devlin's sense of responsibility and pulled. "Do you think what you did was right?" she asked. Devlin did not hesitate. "Yes." "And if the city falls apart because of refusals like yours?" Lena asked. Devlin blinked once. "Then maybe it should," he said, "if it only runs because we keep signing in the dark." Lena stepped back from the intercom. She could not arrest Devlin for that sentence, but she could not ignore the possibility that it might, in aggregate, dismantle the city. She left the control room with the feeling that she was no longer tracking a nuisance. She was tracking a worldview. 4. The translator as suspect. The coastal town where Mina Serrano lived was built to look like peace. White houses, small gardens, ocean air. It felt like the kind of place people moved to when they were done arguing with the world. Serrano's home had bookshelves visible through the front window, and Lena felt a brief relief. Here was someone who loved language enough to respect it. Serrano opened the door before Lena knocked, as if she'd been watching. "I wondered when you'd come," Serrano said, and waved her inside. Lena noted the lack of surprise. Either Serrano was exceptionally perceptive or the idea had already reached her. They sat at a table littered with drafts. Serrano poured coffee with the steady hands of someone who had spent decades making careful distinctions. Lena didn't waste time. 21 years ago, you published an article that cited an unpublished manuscript by Elias Miro, she said. That manuscript is now circulating in excerpt form. It's influencing people to refuse participation in civic systems. I need to know how you got it." Serrano didn't flinch at the word influencing. She looked tired, not guilty. "Elias gave it to me," Serrano said. "He was a graduate student then, brilliant, stubborn. He wrote it after working in a legal clinic. He was furious about consent language." "Where is the manuscript now?" Lena asked. Serrano's gaze moved to the window, where the ocean glittered as if mocking the idea of hidden systems. "I don't have it," she said. "I returned it to him. He didn't want it published. He thought the world wasn't ready for it." Lena asked, "Did you share it with anyone else?" Serrano hesitated. That hesitation was a crack, small but enough. "I quoted it," Serrano said finally. "I shared excerpts in seminars. I gave a copy to a colleague once, years later, because she asked. But that was academic. That wasn't this." Lena placed Amaya's excerpt on the table. "Have you seen this?" Serrano picked it up carefully as if it might stain her fingers. She read, her brow tightening. "That's familiar," Serrano murmured, "but it's not exactly his." Lena's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" Serrano pointed to a sentence. "Elias wrote something like this, yes, but he used the phrase partial comprehension, not no comprehension." She looked up. "That difference matters." Lena felt the shape of the mystery shift. If the circulating excerpt wasn't exact, then someone had altered it, intentionally or through sloppy copying. Serrano flipped the page over, searching for the source. "And this symbol," she said. "This wasn't in his manuscript." Lena asked, "Do you know who's distributing these?" Serrano shook her head. "No, but I can tell you something else." She pushed the excerpt back toward Lena. This has been edited. It's sharper, more absolute. Elias was austere, yes, but he wasn't an absolutist. He believed in— Serrano paused, searching for the right word. In compromise as an ethical tool. He didn't think you could live without trust. He thought you had to choose where to place it. Lena's mind flashed to Devlin, saying, then maybe it should fall apart. That was not compromise. That was purification by collapse. Do you have any of Elias's original text? Lena asked. Serrano stood and went to a bookshelf. She pulled out an old folder, the kind that smelled faintly of dust and glue. Inside were photocopies, annotated in her handwriting. I kept these, Serrano admitted. Not the whole manuscript, just passages I used in class. Habit. She looked almost embarrassed. Academics hoard. Lena accepted the pages. The first was headed in faint type. The blind contract, E. Miro. Below it was the sentence Lena had seen, but around it were others she hadn't. We are asked to sign in the dark, and then we are blamed for what we could not see. But darkness is not an argument against all agreement. It is an argument for designing lanterns. Lena read it again. Lanterns, not refusal, design. The next paragraph continued. When comprehension is partial, as it always is, we rely on proxies, trusted interpreters, institutions, communities. The question is not whether we will trust. The question is whether we will pretend our trust is knowledge. Lena felt a slow coldness. This was a different tone than the excerpt circulating. This was not a call to withdraw. It was a call to humility. Why isn't this part circulating? Lena asked. Mouth tightened. Because it's less satisfying, she said. People like clean lines. They like purity. They like a villain they can refuse. Lena looked at the page again. Somewhere, someone had taken Miro's critique and stripped out the part that made it livable. That wasn't just mutation, that was selection. Do you know where Elias is now? Lena asked. Serrano's eyes flickered. Last I heard, he disappeared from academia. He was working in community tech. Then, nothing. Lena asked. Can you contact him? Serrano shook her head slowly. He cut ties. He was afraid his ideas would be used wrong. Irony, she said, and the word fell like a stone. Lena gathered the photocopies into her folder. As she stood to leave, Serrano said, Be careful with this case. Lena paused at the door. Because the idea is persuasive. Serrano nodded. Because it's correct in its diagnosis, she said, and wrong in its prescription. That's the most contagious kind of wrong. Outside, the ocean air felt too clean. Lena drove back toward the city with Serrano's pages like a fragile antidote. On the highway, her mind kept replaying one line. Darkness is not an argument against all agreement. It is an argument for designing lanterns. If that line were part of the outbreak, perhaps the city would be building lanterns instead of dropping tools. So where had it gone? Who had cut it out? And why did the severed version spread so fast? 5. Palimpsest. The municipal library branch, slated for renovation, was a low concrete building caught between a park and a grocery warehouse. During the day, it served retirees and students. After hours, it served quieter needs. Community meetings, study groups, small ceremonies for people who couldn't afford grand ones. Lena arrived just before closing. She waited in the parking lot, watching people drift out with books tucked under arms. After the last staff member locked the front doors, a side entrance opened. A woman with grey hair and a messenger bag slipped inside. Then a man with a bicycle helmet. Then a pair of students. Lena followed, not hiding, but not announcing herself either. Inside, the lights were dimmed. The community room smelled of old carpet and paper dust. Chairs had been arranged in a loose circle. On a whiteboard was the torn corner square. Under it, written in careful handwriting, Palimpsest, reading practice. Lena stood in the doorway until someone noticed her. A young person with shaved hair looked up, eyes narrowing. We're closed, the person said. Lena held up her badge. Civic Harm Unit, she said. I'm not here to shut you down. I'm here because of what you're reading. The room stilled. No one looked guilty. They looked wary. the way people look when they know the world misunderstands them and is often willing to punish what it misunderstands. An older woman, perhaps the organizer, gestured to an empty chair. "Sit," she said. "If you're here, you should at least listen." Lena sat. She noted the lack of introductions. Names were part of the system. Perhaps this group practiced anonymity as an ethical stance. On the table in the center of the circle lay a stack of paper, photocopied pages with the symbol at the top. Each page had a different excerpt, different layout. Some were highlighted. Some had marginal notes. The organizer spoke, her voice steady. "We read to see what's been overwritten," she said. "Palimpsest means layers. You scrape one story away and another is underneath." Lena listened. The group discussed consent language, proprietary systems, the way people were asked to agree to things they could not realistically understand. They spoke with anger, yes, but also with grief. Lena recognized the pattern. People who had been made complicit without being given power, now trying to reclaim agency by refusing. The organizer handed out an excerpt. Lena took it carefully, as if accepting a sample from a contaminated site. The excerpt read, "When the world demands your signature, it is asking for your silence. Refusal is the only honest speech." Lena glanced at Serrano's photocopies in her bag. Miro had written about lanterns. This excerpt was about silence and purity. Someone in the circle said, "If we keep signing, we keep making it legal." Another said, "But if we refuse, we stop being the hands." Lena felt the urge to interrupt, to say, Miro didn't mean this, but she held it. Correction would turn into argument, and argument would turn her into a participant in the idea's reproduction. Instead, she observed how the idea moved through the room, not as doctrine delivered, but as a shared act of interpretation. Each person added their own story. The organizer asked Lena, "Why are you here?" Lena answered honestly. "Because people are leaving their jobs mid-shift," she said. "Because trains stopped today. Because hospitals are struggling. Because this isn't staying in reading rooms." A murmur went through the group. The organizer's eyes held something like pity. "Of course it isn't," she said. "You can't expect people to read something like this and then go back to pressing buttons that hurt others." Lena asked, "Where did you get these excerpts?" The organizer smiled faintly. "You think there's a source," she said, "a person you can arrest." Lena didn't deny it. She felt the old detective impulse, find the hand behind the hand. The organizer gestured at the stack. "These come from everywhere," she said. A scan passed from a professor, a quote from a podcast, a paragraph someone typed from memory, a pamphlet left on a bus seat, an email forwarded without context. She tapped the torn corner square. "We marked them so people know. This is incomplete. A corner is missing." Lena stared at the symbol anew. She had assumed it was a brand, a logo, a movement mark. But here it was a warning, incomplete. Yet the warning had become a beacon. Lena asked who designed the symbol. The organizer shrugged. It appeared, like all good symbols do. That was an evasion, but perhaps also true. Symbols often emerged from small acts repeated. Lena asked, "Do you know Elias Miro?" A few people exchanged glances. One person, the shaved-haired one, said, "You mean the ghost author?" The organizer said, "Miro is a name attached to a set of ideas. Whether he's a person or a mask, it doesn't matter. The argument stands." Lena felt the trap. If she focused on the author, she would miss how the idea lived beyond authorship. But if she ignored the author, she might miss the missing half. She asked carefully, "Do you have any full version? Not excerpts, not quotes?" "The whole text." The organizer's gaze sharpened. "If we did, why would we give it to the unit?" "Because the version circulating is making people believe the only ethical choice is refusal," Lena said. "And I have reason to believe the original text wasn't that absolute." A silence settled. Then someone in the circle laughed, a short, bitter sound. "So the city wants the moderate version," they said. "The version that lets the machine keep running." Lena met their eyes. "The city wants trains to move," she said, "hospitals to function, children to be taught. But I'm not here to defend the machine. I'm here because the machine can't be fixed if everyone leaves it. And people leaving it isn't freedom if it destroys their lives." The organizer leaned back, studying Lena as if she were another text to interpret. After a moment, she said, "There is someone you should speak to." Lena's pen hovered. "A printer," the organizer said. "An old man who runs a shop near the river. He started reproducing the excerpts, not for money, for conviction." She paused. "He might know where some of these came from, but understand this, if you try to stop the pages, you will make them sacred." Lena nodded. She already knew. Censorship was fertilizer for certain kinds of ideas. As the group returned to discussion, Lena slipped out with the address. In her bag, Serrano's photocopies felt heavier than paper. They felt like a counterfactual timeline, a world where Miro's lantern line had spread instead of the refusal line. Lena drove toward the river and wondered, not for the first time, whether the unit itself was a lantern or just another ritual of legitimacy. 6. The printer. The print shop was small, wedged between a repair store and a closed-down cafe. In the window were handmade posters, local bands, community notices, a flyer for a neighborhood meeting titled, "Who Owns the Rules?" Inside, the air smelled of ink and warm metal. An old man stood at a cutting machine, aligning stacks of paper with meticulous care. He wore no gloves. His fingers were stained gray. He looked up as Lena entered. His eyes flicked to her badge. "I don't print for the city," he said. Lena kept her voice calm. "I'm not here to commission," she said. "I'm here because I think you've been printing these." She placed one of the excerpts on the counter. The old man, his name tag read Rafi, did not deny it. He picked up the page and ran his thumb along the torn corner symbol as if it were a familiar scar. "Yes," he said. "And?" Lena chose her words. "I'm investigating the origin," she said. "Not to punish printing, but because the excerpts are causing disruptions. People are refusing work in essential roles. It's spreading." Rafi's mouth tightened. "Good," he said simply. Lena felt the temptation to argue. She resisted. Instead, she asked, "Where did you get the original file?" Rafi set the page down. "There is no original file," he said. "There are scraps, pieces. People bring them. I scan them. I clean them up. I print. That's the work." "You edit them," Lena said. Rafi shrugged. "I make them readable." Lena's gaze sharpened. "Do you ever change the text?" Rafi hesitated, just a fraction. "Enough." "I correct typos," he said. "I standardize. I add the symbol so people know it's part of the set." Lena asked, "Do you remove anything?" Rafi's eyes hardened. "Why would I?" Lena reached into her bag and pulled out Serrano's photocopy, the one with the lantern line. She placed it beside the excerpt Rafi had printed. "Have you ever seen this paragraph?" she asked. Rafi leaned in. His eyes moved across the page. For a moment his face softened, then tightened again. "No," he said. "That's not in the excerpts." "It's from the same manuscript," Lena said. "Or at least from a copy of it. It changes the tone. It suggests building lanterns, not refusing everything." Rafi's jaw clenched. "Lanterns," he repeated, as if tasting something bitter. "Lanterns are nice, but who builds them? The people in charge? The people who profit from darkness?" He shook his head. "Lanterns are a fantasy. Refusal is real." Lena asked, "Did you decide that, or did the text decide it for you?" Rafi stared at her. "What kind of question is that?" "The kind that matters," Lena said. "If this is an idea outbreak, then you're not just printing pages. You're selecting mutations." Rafi's mouth twitched. "You talk like a doctor," he said, "as if I'm infected." Lena didn't deny it. She had read enough of the excerpts to feel their pull, the way they made moral life look simple. "Don't sign. Don't participate. Be clean." She asked, "Who brought you the first piece?" Rafi looked away. For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the machines. Then he said, "A woman. Years ago. She was angry. She said her brother had died of paperwork. He glanced at Lena quickly, as if daring her to correct him. Not physically, socially. He couldn't get housing, couldn't get benefits. Every form was a trap. She said the system demanded his signature on things he couldn't understand, and when he failed, they called him non-compliant. She gave me a page with a paragraph about signing in the dark. She said, "Print this. People need words." Lena's skin prickled. "Did she say where she got it?" Rafi shook his head. "She said it was from Miro." Lena asked, "Did she have more pages?" "She had a few," Rafi admitted. "Not enough to make a book, just enough to make a weapon." Lena's mind latched onto the phrase weapon. Not in the sense of violence, but in the sense of leverage. Words shaped to pry something open. "Do you know her name?" Lena asked. Rafi hesitated. "It doesn't matter," he said. "She's not the point." Lena leaned forward. "It matters," she said. "Because if she had pages, she might have had the missing parts. The lantern parts. The parts that stopped this from becoming a purity cult." Rafi's eyes narrowed. "You think moderation is an antidote," he said. "Sometimes it's just anesthesia." Lena felt the conversation sliding toward ideology, and she forced it back to evidence. "I'm not asking you to stop printing," she said. "I'm asking you to help me find the full text. If the idea is going to spread, it should spread whole, not severed." Rafi studied her, weighing sincerity against the badge. Finally, he reached under the counter and pulled out a small notebook, the kind printers use for orders. He flipped to a page and slid it toward Lena. A name was written there along with an address. S. Orloff, Archive Services. Lena looked up. Rafi said, "She came back later. She asked if I'd seen more. I told her I hadn't. She left that contact. Said if I found anything to call." "I never did." He paused. "Maybe she did." Lena copied the information. As she turned to leave, Rafi said, not unkindly, "You can't stop this by finding a book." Lena paused at the door. "I know," she said, "but I might stop it from becoming only its sharpest fragment." Outside, the river wind smelled of cold water and exhaust. Lena sat in her car and stared at the address. Archive services sounded like a bureaucratic euphemism. It could be a storage facility. It could be a private firm that handled records for those who wanted their past organized, hidden, or erased. In other words, the kind of place where a missing manuscript might be kept. Lena started the engine. 7. The archivist who erases. S. Orloff's office was on the 3rd floor of a building that used to house insurance companies. The hallway smelled of old carpet and quiet money. The door plaque read, "Orloff Information Stewardship. We keep what matters." Inside, the office was too clean for paper. The desks were minimal. The walls held abstract prints, safe art for people who didn't want to reveal taste. A receptionist looked up, eyes scanning Lena's badge with a practiced neutrality. "Do you have an appointment?" Lena said, "I need to speak with S. Orloff." The receptionist hesitated. "About what?" Lena chose the least inflammatory truth. "About a manuscript that may be in your possession," she said. "It's related to a civic harm investigation." The receptionist's face tightened. "Wait," she said, and disappeared behind a door. Lena stood in the sterile lobby, feeling the mismatch between the messy, human spread of the idea and this controlled environment. Here, information wasn't something passed hand to hand. It was something managed. A minute later, a woman emerged. She was in her 40s, hair pulled back, eyes sharp in a way that suggested she missed nothing and forgave less. "Sasha Orloff," she said. "You're with the unit." Lena nodded. Orloff gestured to a conference room. "Tell me what you want." Lena sat, placing her folder on the table. "I'm looking for Elias Miro's manuscript, The Blind Contract," she said. "Specifically the full version, not excerpts." Orloff's expression did not change. "We handle many documents," she said. "Why would we have that?" Lena slid Serrano's photocopy across the table. "Because someone has been distributing altered excerpts," she said. and I have reason to believe you were contacted about them. Orloff's eyes moved across the page. For the first time, a flicker, recognition. You're not accusing me of printing pamphlets, Orloff said flatly. I'm not accusing, Lena said. I'm tracing. Orloff leaned back. Tracing is what we do too, she said, except we trace ownership, consent, provenance, the legal kinds of lineage. Lena said, ideas have lineage too. Orloff's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. And you think lineage implies guilt? Lena felt the shift. This was a person who understood the question at the heart of the case. She wasn't defensive because she was ignorant. She was defensive because she saw the stakes. I think lineage implies responsibility, Lena said. Somebody cut the lantern paragraph out. Somebody made the idea sharper. Orloff tapped the table lightly. You've already decided there's a somebody. She looked at Lena. What if the sharpness is what people wanted? What if the world selected it the way a petri dish selects the bacteria that survive antibiotics? Lena held Orloff's gaze. Then the world is the crime scene, she said, and that's too large to investigate. Orloff's eyes narrowed slightly, as if appreciating the honesty. After a pause, she said, Yes, I was contacted 2 years ago. A woman asked me to locate a manuscript. She had a name, Miro. She had a title. She had a few pages. She wanted the rest. Did you find it? Lena asked. Orloff's gaze shifted to the conference room window, where the hallway lay empty. We don't discuss client work, she said automatically, then stopped herself. But you're not asking for the client's secrets. You're asking for a public safety problem. That's different. Lena waited. Orloff sighed, the sound of someone deciding to step onto unstable ground. I found traces, she said. Academic archives, old emails, a reference in a student's thesis, but the manuscript itself, she shook her head. It wasn't in any official repository. It was never deposited. It was like it had been deliberately kept out of circulation. Lena's pulse quickened. So it exists, Orloff nodded slowly. I believe it does, or did. Lena asked, Did you find Elias Miro? Orloff's eyes sharpened again. Why do you assume he wants to be found? Because, Lena thought, his name was being used to dismantle a city, but she said, because he might be the only person who can clarify what he meant. Orloff leaned forward. Clarify, she repeated, as if meaning is stable. Lena did not argue. She had seen meaning mutate. Orloff opened a drawer and pulled out a thin folder. She slid it across the table. Inside was a printed email exchange, metadata stripped but the content intact. The sender was anonymous. The message contained a link and a short line. If you want the whole lantern, stop looking in libraries. Below that was an address, not a website, a physical location, an industrial district on the edge of the city, near the old water treatment plant. Lena looked up. Did you go there? She asked. Orloff's expression hardened. No, she said, because I don't chase riddles. Lena closed the folder. I do, she said. Orloff watched her. Be careful, she said quietly. Not because of danger in the alleyway sense, because if you find the full manuscript, you may amplify it. Lena stood. If I don't find it, she said, the severed version will keep amplifying itself. Orloff's eyes held a complicated emotion, something between concern and resignation. As Lena left, Orloff said, One more thing. Lena paused. Orloff said, The woman who hired me, she wasn't a fanatic, she was grieving. She thought the manuscript would explain why her brother couldn't survive the system. She wanted something to blame. Lena nodded slowly. The idea wasn't just moral logic. It was consolation. Outside, the city's skyline shimmered with glass towers that reflected sunlight like a promise. Lena drove toward the industrial district with the folder on her passenger seat, feeling the weight of what she was about to do. She was not just tracking a text. She was tracking the human need to make suffering meaningful. 8. The water plant. The industrial district near the old water treatment plant smelled of rust and wet concrete. Warehouses stood like sleeping animals. The streets were wide and mostly empty, built for trucks that no longer came as often. Lena parked near a chain-link fence. Beyond it, the water plant's old filtration basins lay abandoned, concrete pools cracked and filled with rainwater that reflected the grey sky. The address from the email led her to a small building beside the basins, its windows covered with paper. A hand-painted sign on the door read, "Lantern Workshop." Lena stared at the sign, the word from Serrano's photocopy, now literal. She knocked. The door opened after a pause. A man stood there, tall and thin, his hair streaked with grey. He wore a work shirt stained with ink and something like clay. His eyes were wary but not startled, as if he had expected visitors eventually. "Yes?" he said. Lena held up her badge. "Lena Sato," she said. "Civic Harm Unit. I'm looking for Elias Miro." The man's face tightened. For a moment, Lena thought he might close the door. Instead, he stepped back. "Come in," he said. Inside the building was not a workshop in the craft sense. It was a room full of paper and old machines, scanners, printers, shelves of binders. On a wall hung a large sheet with the torn corner square drawn repeatedly in different sizes, like a study of a symbol. The man gestured to a chair. "I'm Elias," he said simply. Lena's chest tightened. She had expected a ghost, a myth, a dead end, not a person standing in a room full of his own fragments. "You know why I'm here?" Lena said. Elias nodded. "The trains," he said. "The hospital." His voice carried no pride, only a tiredness that suggested he'd been watching the spread, like someone watching a fire started by a spark he'd once held. Lena sat. "Your manuscript is circulating," she said, "but not the whole of it. Excerpts. Altered. It's causing people to refuse participation in systems they can't understand. It's becoming a doctrine." Elias's eyes closed briefly, as if he were absorbing a blow. "I tried to prevent this," he murmured. "How?" Lena asked. Elias stood and went to a shelf. He pulled out a thick binder. On the spine, handwritten, "The Blind Contract." Full. He placed it on the table between them. Lena's fingers hovered over it, hesitant. She felt the unit's training. Do not consume the pathogen without protective framing, but she was already in the outbreak zone. Elias said, "I kept it off the internet. I didn't publish. I gave it to a few people I trusted. And still—" Lena opened the binder. The pages were dense with text, some handwritten corrections in the margins. The first page began not with accusation, but with a question. What do we owe each other when we cannot fully understand the systems that bind us? Lena looked up. "This isn't what's circulating," she said. Elias's mouth tightened. "No," he said. "What's circulating is the part where I'm angry." Lena flipped through. She found the paragraphs she'd seen in excerpts. Signing in the dark, consent as theatre. But around them were sections about proxies, about communal oversight, about designing lanterns. There were also personal passages, stories of his time in the legal clinic, of watching people fail forms that were designed to look neutral. Lena asked, "Who cut it?" Elias's eyes sharpened. "Who cut what?" "The lantern parts," Lena said. "The sections that say refusal isn't the only answer." Elias's shoulders sagged. "Nobody cut them from my binder," he said. "But people didn't copy them. They copied the parts that fit their rage." He looked at Lena. "You want a villain. There isn't one. There's appetite." Lena felt frustration flare. "But the circulating excerpts are altered," she said. "Some sentences are more absolute. Someone changed partial to no. That's not just selective copying." Elias nodded slowly. "Yes," he said. "That happened." He looked down at his hands. "I've seen versions with words I didn't write. People rewrite to match their certainty. They don't notice they're doing it." Lena leaned forward. "Do you know who started printing the symbol?" she asked. Elias glanced at the wall of torn corner squares. "I did," he admitted. "Why?" "Because I knew excerpts would spread," Elias said quietly. "I knew people would tear corners off texts. So I marked them. I wanted the symbol to mean incomplete. Don't mistake this fragment for the whole. And now it's a brand, Lena said. Elias nodded, a small, pained motion. Warnings become flags, he said. That's another mutation. Lena's mind raced. Elias wasn't the villain. He was the original host, horrified by what the idea had become. But his attempt to control its spread had, paradoxically, given it a recognizable form. She asked, "Why call it the blind contract?" Elias's gaze lifted, distant. "Because I watch people sign things that weren't written for them," he said. "Because I watched institutions treat ignorance as consent. Because I realized we'd built a society where you could only participate by pretending you understood what you couldn't." He looked at Lena again. "And because I was complicit, too. I worked on systems. I wrote code. I told myself it was neutral." Lena felt the case become intimate. The idea wasn't an external invader. It was a mirror held up to modern life. Elias said, "Tell me something," he added. "Does your unit have the authority to ban my words?" Lena hesitated. "We have recommendations," she said. "We can classify material as harmful. We can request takedowns. We can disrupt distribution." Elias's eyes narrowed. "So you can make thinking contraband?" Lena felt a chill. The deep question at the center of the case rose like a tide. At what point did thinking become a crime? Lena said, "We don't want to criminalize thought," she said. "We want to prevent harm." Elias gave a small, tired laugh. "That's what every censor says," he murmured. Then his face softened. "But I understand the bind. If trains stop, people suffer. If hospitals stall, people suffer. And the idea offers suffering people a way to feel righteous." He looked at the binder. "It's a dangerous comfort." Lena stared at the full manuscript. "If I take this," she said, "and release it, won't that spread it further?" Elias nodded. "Yes," he said, "but it might also change it." He tapped the lantern paragraph with his finger. "You can't unspread an idea. You can only compete with it, or mutate it yourself." Lena sat back, the weight of that settling into her bones. She had come looking for an origin she could prosecute. Instead, she had found a man who had tried to write a lantern and watched people turn it into a torch. Elias leaned forward, his voice quieter. "There's something else," he said. "The reason the refusal variant spread so fast is because it offers a simple test. Participate or be clean. Humans love simple tests. They're addictive." Lena thought of Devlin Marr pressing his hands into his lap as if refusing to touch the city's machinery. She asked Elias, "Do you think the idea should be stopped?" Elias's eyes held sorrow. "I think the harm should be stopped," he said. "But I don't know if you can stop harm without making martyrs." Lena closed the binder gently. She realized the case wasn't about finding a culprit. It was about choosing an intervention. 9. The intervention. Back at the unit, Klein listened as Lena laid the binder on the conference table. "You found him?" Klein said, voice flat with relief and dread. "I found the full text," Lena corrected, "and the author." Klein looked at the binder as if it were a weapon. "Can we suppress it?" he asked. "Classify it. Remove it from platforms. Shut down the print shops." Lena heard the familiar reflex. Treat the idea like contraband, like a drug. Confiscate, burn, silence. She also heard Mina Bhatia's warning, "If you try to stop it by calling it criminal, you'll only prove it right." Lena said, "We can disrupt distribution," she admitted. "But that will make it sacred, and the excerpt version will keep spreading through private channels anyway." Klein's face tightened. "So what do you propose?" Lena opened the binder to the lantern paragraph and slid it toward him. "This," she said. "We release the full text, with context. We publish the parts people aren't copying. We show that Miro wasn't preaching purity through refusal. He was arguing for designing systems people can actually consent to." Klein's eyes moved across the lines. He frowned. "You think the antidote is more exposure?" "It's not an antidote," Lena said. It's an inoculation. If the idea is going to spread, it should spread with its own brakes. Klein leaned back, rubbing his forehead. And what if the full text radicalizes more people? What if it gives the movement a Bible? Lena felt the fear behind his question, the fear of losing control. She said, "The movement already treats fragments like scripture," she replied. "The full text might undermine that. It's harder to deify something that admits uncertainty." Klein stared at the binder. "You're suggesting we become publishers." "I'm suggesting we become public health," Lena said. "Not police." Klein's mouth tightened. "Public health quarantines," he said. "Yes," Lena said. "Sometimes. But quarantining language is different. It breeds mutation. It makes the most extreme variant the only one left." Klein's gaze sharpened. "And you're sure you're not infected?" he asked quietly. Lena felt the sting because it was a fair question. She had read the excerpts. She had felt their pull. She had thought, more than once, about how many times she'd clicked agree without reading, because reading wasn't possible. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "That's the problem. The idea is persuasive because it points at something true." Klein exhaled. "We need something actionable," he said. "Trains can't stop again. Hospitals can't lose staff. We can't have sanitation routes abandoned because someone read a paragraph." Lena nodded. "Then we treat the underlying conditions too," she said. "We audit the consent systems. We demand transparency. We give people actual lanterns. Otherwise, we're just fighting symptoms." Klein looked at her with a mixture of admiration and exhaustion. "You're asking for reform," he said. "I'm asking for prevention," Lena corrected. "Ideas don't infect healthy tissue as easily." There was a long silence. In it, Lena felt the weight of the unit's mandate. Protect civic continuity. The city's fragility was not an abstraction. People depended on trains, hospitals, sanitation. Refusal as a moral epidemic could become a slow disaster. But she also felt the weight of the alternative. Criminalize thought, and you might preserve continuity at the cost of turning the city into a place where people feared their own minds. Klein finally said, "We can't officially endorse a manuscript that's currently being used to justify non-compliance." Lena said, "Then we don't endorse it. We analyze it publicly. We publish a report, the idea's genealogy, its mutations, its harms. We include the full text as evidence, annotated. We treat it like a pathogen sample with a lab note. This fragment is missing context. Here is the context. Here are the risks. Here is how to talk about it without turning it into purity." Klein's eyes narrowed. "And you think people will read annotations?" Lena almost smiled. "Some won't," she said. "But some will. And the ones who won't are already reading the fragments. This at least offers another branch of the idea to latch onto." Klein leaned forward. "You're gambling," he said. "Yes," Lena said, "because there's no safe move. Suppression is a gamble. Release is a gamble. Doing nothing is a gamble." Klein stared at her for a moment, then nodded once. "Draft the report," he said. "And Lena." "Yes?" Klein's voice was softer. "Don't write it like propaganda," he said. "If we sound like we're trying to domesticate the idea, we'll lose." Lena nodded. "I'll write it like an autopsy," she said. "With compassion." That night, in her apartment, Lena began drafting. She wrote not only the timeline, forum post to reading group to printer to hospital, but also the human reasons. Exhaustion, moral injury, the shame of complicity. She wrote the idea's symptoms, the way clinicians wrote symptoms. Sudden refusal of previously routine tasks, moral language intensifying toward purity, isolation from friends who still sign, physical rituals, gloves, covered hands, avoidance of touchscreens, symbol fixation, torn corner square. She wrote the vectors, professional burnout communities, reading groups seeking coherence, viral media that rewarded certainty, print culture that made fragments feel sacred. She wrote the mutations, partial comprehension, no comprehension, design lanterns removed, trust as inevitable removed, refusal as one tool, refusal as only tool. And then she wrote the question she was afraid to ask in any official document. When does thinking become a crime? She didn't answer it directly. She could not, but she wrote around it. Thinking becomes dangerous when it demands purity that makes ordinary life impossible. Policing thought becomes dangerous when it makes ordinary doubt impossible. She realized the paradox. The city wanted to stop an idea because it disrupted systems, but the idea's core critique was that systems demanded obedience without understanding. If the city responded by demanding obedience to silence, it would become the very thing the idea accused it of being. At dawn, Lena emailed the report draft to Klein. Then she went to the transit control center again. Devlin Marr was still in custody, though now in a more humane room with a window that opened onto the street. He looked up as Lena entered. Lena placed a printed page on the table in front of him. It was the lantern paragraph. Devlin read it, his brow furrowed. "This isn't what I read," he said. "I know," Lena said. Devlin looked up. "Is it real?" "It's from the full manuscript," Lena said. "The author is alive." Devlin stared at the page again as if the words might change. His mouth tightened. "Lanterns," he murmured. "That sounds like compromise." "It's more like design," Lena said. "It doesn't let you off the hook. It asks you to build something instead of only refusing." Devlin's eyes narrowed. "And you want me to go back and press yes?" Lena shook her head. "I want you to stop thinking refusal is the only clean act," she said. "Because if everyone refuses, the people who suffer first aren't the executives. They're the commuters, the patients, the kids." Devlin stared at her, conflict flickering across his face. For the first time, she saw something other than certainty. "You're trying to infect me with a softer version," he said. Lena didn't deny it. "I'm trying to give you the missing corner," she said. Devlin looked down at his hands. Slowly, he pressed his fingertips against the table, as if testing whether touch could be ethical. Lena left without pushing further. Ideas couldn't be forced. They had to be offered like vaccines, a controlled exposure with context. As she walked out of the building, she saw a new flyer on a nearby wall, the torn corner square. The slogan, "No signature without sight." But beneath it, in smaller handwriting, someone had added a second line, one Lena hadn't seen before. "Build the light or live in dark." A mutation, not yet an antidote, but a shift. Epilogue, what the city could not arrest. The unit's report went public 3 weeks later. It did not stop the refusals. Nothing that had already entered people's moral bloodstream could be pulled out cleanly. But the pattern changed. Some refusers remained absolutists. They treated the report as proof the city feared the truth. They doubled down, turning refusal into identity. Others, more than Lena expected, read the full text and felt something loosen. The reading groups began arguing, not just about refusal, but about lanterns, citizen oversight boards, open source audits, consent reforms, community interpreters for complex systems. The idea mutated toward construction. The printer by the river began including the lantern paragraph in every packet, despite his skepticism. He did not announce his change as repentance. He framed it as completeness. The missing corner returned. In the transit control center, Devlin Marr did not return to his old job. He could not. But he agreed to meet with a civic oversight committee and describe, in plain language, what it felt like to be the human hand that legalized a machine he couldn't read. He did it without drama. That was his power. He made refusal sound like a reasonable response to a reasonable injury. And the city, because it was made of people, not just systems, began slowly to redesign some of its consent rituals. Not out of sudden virtue, but out of learned fear. Fear of collapse by moral non-participation. Lena continued her work. New outbreaks appeared, new ideas with new symbols, some kinder, some more corrosive, But blind contract stayed with her because it had forced her to confront the line she had always tried to keep clear. She had wanted to believe that crimes were acts and ideas were just weather, that you could regulate behavior without touching belief. Yet she had watched a sentence stop trains. She had watched a paragraph make a nurse's hands tremble with conscience. She had watched a symbol meant as warning become a flag. One evening, months later, Lena returned to the old library branch. Renovation had begun. The community room was closed, but in the lobby someone had taped a note to the bulletin board. It was handwritten, no symbol, no slogan, just a question. If we must sign, what do we owe the signature? Lena stood for a long time, reading it as if it were evidence. At last she took out her notebook and wrote her own answer, not for any report, not for any supervisor, but for herself. Thinking becomes a crime only when you grant someone the power to punish it. But thinking becomes dangerous when it offers purity as a substitute for responsibility. An idea is not guilty. It has no hands. Guilt belongs to the ways we use it and to the ways we pretend we didn't. She closed the notebook and walked out into the city, where screens still asked for agreement, where people still clicked without reading, where lanterns were still being built too slowly. And yet, in the slow, mutating spread of the question, she saw something that resembled hope, not because the city had defeated an idea, but because it had learned to live with one without pretending it was harmless. The criminal, she realized, was never only the idea. It was the darkness that made the idea feel like the only honest light.